Chapter 71. What good are you, Yan Qingxi? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 71. What good are you, Yan Qingxi? Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yu Tingfeng turned speechless. Yan Qingxi yawned and pushed him away. His face was so sullen that it was practically a charcoal-black color. She touched him on the face and said, "I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while. Don't disturb me." She went into a bedroom as soon as she found one. She kicked her shoes off her feet and collapsed without even taking off her clothes. The tiring night caused her to fall asleep immediately after her head hit the pillow. Yu Tingfeng sat in the living room, waiting there all alone for a solid 10 minutes. He was thoroughly exasperated. Just how brave was that woman to say such a thing when she was in his house and within his grasp? She spent so much time doing all those things, dragging him along to flout the law for nearly the entire night, all so she could get him involved in her mischief. Was all that just to ensure that he would be stripped of the means to threaten her? Having extirpated the danger posed to her, she would do away with the courtesy toward him. Indeed, everything she said was exactly the same as in the studio, that is, to play him for a fool. Yu Tingfeng opened his shirt button by button, while a sinister evil began surfacing in his eyes. She had guts, that Yan Qingxi, but she had forgotten that Yu Tingfeng was not to be messed with. The only reason she was allowed to be so unrestrained was that he permitted it. If she really did make him unhappy, he would have ample means of putting her in order. By the time he walked into the bedroom, he had already taken off his clothes. With skin as white as ivory and pupils as dark as ink, his figure was slender yet handsomely ruthless. His features were chiseled, and his body was as perfect as the engraving of a master sculptor. He could make any woman capitulate to him if that was what he wanted. But no one was looking at him. Yan Qingxi was laying on the bed with her eyes closed, having entered a state of deep sleep. She would rather sleep an extra minute longer than look at a man, no matter how handsome that man may be. Feeling as though he was in a one-man show, Yu Tingfeng was infuriated to no end. Yan Qingxi, on the other hand, was sleeping like it was the middle of the night. Yu Tingfeng grabbed her shoulder and flipped her over, stretching his hand to undress her. His hands were rough, and Yan Qingxi's black tracksuit was swiftly taken off. She was left with only a sports bra and her underwear. Her fair-skinned body lay against the gray bed, and when the morning sunlight shone all over her, that beautiful skin looked just like a shining pearl. For men, it was a sight so seductive that no words could describe it. Yu Tingfeng closed his eyes and leaned toward her. Before he even came into contact with her, Yan Qingxi mumbled to him sleepily while her eyes were still shut, "Mr. Yu, if you're that interested in rape, then go ahead." Yu Tingfeng halted his movements. He admitted to being someone who did not have a good heart, whose morality and ethics were at the barest of minimums. Rape. He could care less about whether he was being violent with Yan Qingxi. However, when he extended his hand, he thought, is this really something I can't get from a woman? Do I really need to rape her? For Yu Tingfeng, Yan Qingxi's use of the word rape was utterly humiliating to his pride and dignity. His face became cold and detached after he stopped himself. Barely seconds ago, his lust was still bubbling strongly, but in the blink of an eye, it vanished into thin air. In fact, his self-control was better than most, but when faced with Yan Qingxi, he was more than likely to lose his self-control. Yu Tingfeng grumbled slowly, "All right. I'll let you go today. You owe me another night." With her eyes still shut, Yan Qingxi twitched her lip in disdain and flipped her body around. Seemingly unconcerned on whether she was clothed or not, she resumed her deep sleep almost instantly. Yu Tingfeng's stare was as cold as ice. He struggled to understand why he was being so patient with this woman. What good was she? Chapter 72. She would bite the other person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 72. She would bite the other person. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Was she beautiful? He had met prettier women before, surely. A good temper. Nonsense. Before her, he never knew that a woman's temper could be that bad. Kindness. Bullsh *T. Never in his life did he see anyone more toxic and dangerous. Despite all those qualities, why was it that she could entice him into doing all sorts of unlawful things? To think that he helped her murder someone. Yu Tingfeng stared intently at Yan Qingxi. Other people would let their guard down when sleeping, thus making them look less hate-worthy. She was different, her hands formed a fist even when she was sleeping. At the same time, her brows were furrowed, her lips were pursed, and her expression had a sort of barrier that shielded her from the outside world. It was as if she would open her mouth and bite down on anyone who came close to her. Yu Tingfeng stared at her for half an hour. His calm face became more and more enraged. He stood up suddenly, took his phone, then left the room. He dialed a number. "Hey, it's me. Delete all of last night's footage from every single one of the hospital surveillance cameras." The other side asked a simple, "Why?" Yu Tingfeng's lips turned into a cold smile. "Why, you ask? It's my hospital, and I want the footage erased." "You think you have a say in this?" Having hung up, he was still unable to quell the wrath burning inside him. He tossed the phone out, turned around, then entered the bedroom. He grabbed Yan Qingxi's bare ankles. "Get out. This is my room." Roused from her sleep for the second time, Yan Qingxi mumbled, "Don't disturb me." Yu Tingfeng clenched his jaw. "This is my bed." Yan Qingxi did a couple of kicks with her leg. "I've already slept with you. This is just a bed anyway." Yu Tingfeng was speechless. The next moment, he laid down on the bed, occupying a large part of it and taking the entire blanket for himself. He originally thought that Yan Qingxi would leave the room willingly once she felt cold. Eventually, she curled into a ball and continued sleeping, notwithstanding her near-nakedness and proximity to the bed edge. It seemed as though such poor conditions had no effect on her. She was much unlike most other people, who would unconsciously search for a warmer spot. She simply curled herself there without moving. Yu Tingfeng sighed. His efforts were in vain, and he was still the one who lost out in the end. He raised his leg up, knowing that a gentle kick would send Yan Qingxi falling off the bed. A few seconds later, however, he retracted his feet and turned around. With his back facing her, he no longer paid her any attention. Yu Tingfeng thought that his anger would affect his ability to sleep well. Little did he know, he fell asleep rather quickly. Awakened by the cold, Yan Qingxi sat up and saw that Yu Tingfeng was fully covered by a blanket. He slept on the other end, separated from her by more than a meter, like a small river that could not be jumped across. Her face remained expressionless as she got down from the bed. She grabbed her clothes as well as her shoes and walked barefoot out of the door. But the moment she left the room, the main door swung open. Then, an old woman came in. The two of them made direct eye contact and were stumped. The old lady reacted quickly. Her facial expressions were largely exaggerated and she pointed at Yan Qingxi, saying, "Who are you? Why are you in my son's home?" From the lady's wealthy-looking clothes, Yan Qingxi deduced that she was a dame who lived like royalty. Yan Qingxi wore her clothes slowly and answered bluntly, "To sleep with your son, of course. What else would I be here for?" Chapter 73. A naked little vixen was the first thing she saw when she came in. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 73. A naked little vixen was the first thing she saw when she came in. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yan Qingxi's actions were done at a moderate pace as she wore her clothes in front of Mrs. Yu, without any sense of shame. She did not think it was disgraceful to wear her clothes in front of Yu Tingfeng, much less Mrs. Yu herself. It was Mrs. Yu, in fact, who got anxious in that short moment. Nonsense. My son never lets anyone hear. Yu Tingfeng was a self-serving person who did not permit anyone else to enter his bedroom back at the Yu Manor. His other residences were the same, although he sometimes permitted his mother to come and visit. He would never let anyone, not even his friends, enter into his domain. Not even the tiniest hint of someone else's odor was permissible within his territory. Yu Tingfeng did not return home the night before, and Mrs. Yu's calls to him were left unanswered even until noon. With no peace of mind, Mrs. Yu went over to check on him. She did not expect a naked little vixen to be the first thing she saw when she came in. Mrs. Yu was completely at loss for words. Yan Qingxi put on her pants and remarked slowly, "You're Yu Tingfeng's mama, aren't you, old lady? You're the one who gave birth to him, right? You can't surely be thinking that I visited your son just to have a cup of water." Mrs. Yu got angry, with the wrinkles on her face nearly splitting apart. "I can tell that you're just a shameless little slut. How could my son even take a liking to you? How brazen of that minx to say all those shameless words." Mrs. Yu was so angry that she began panting incessantly. She had never met anyone as thick-skinned as the vixen in all the years that she lived. Yan Qingxi pulled the zipper on her top, saying, "Tch, I'm terribly sorry, but your son does, in fact, take a liking to me. He loves me with all his heart. Tell me, why would I be here if that wasn't the case?" Mrs. Yu pointed her finger at Yan Qingxi. You, just you wait. Where's my son? What did you do to my son? I'll let him take care of you. Oh, you're so fun to play with. This little slut has already entered the bedroom, so, of course, I've enjoyed myself with your son, Noel. And Mrs. Yu flung her hand and hurried into the bedroom. She did not usually dare to enter her son's bedroom, yet that minx was brave enough to do so. Pushing the door open, Mrs. Yu indeed saw her son there. He was sleeping on the bed, with the blanket covering him from the waist down. His lower body was concealed, but his torso was completely bare, making for a very suggestive scene. One look was enough for Mrs. Yu to imagine the scenario that unfolded the night before. Her son had engaged in sexual relations with that slut. The one and only thought on Mrs. Yu's mind was, "My son has been taken advantage of." Yan Qingxi opened the door intending to leave, but Mrs. Yu held her back. "Wait right there, you're not allowed to leave. Now, tell me, who are you? How did you get involved with my son?" Mrs. Yu's blood began boiling the more she looked at Yan Qingxi's slutty face. What was so good about that woman? How did that woman get involved with her son? Yan Qingxi leaned lazily on the door and chided, "I slept with your son, old lady. That's the truth and nothing but the truth. What are you going to do about it? Should I take responsibility for your son, or should your son take responsibility for me?" You. Yan Qingxi stretched out her hand and patted Mrs. Yu's shoulders. "If you don't want me to harm your son, be good and move over. Let me leave, and also, take good care of your son so he doesn't come looking for me. My son doesn't like you. On the contrary. I really did sleep with him." Yan Qingxi felt her heart stir with evil. She rubbed her belly and remarked, "Who knows, if I'm not happy, I'll give you a grandchild 10 months from now." Chapter 74. Devoured, Bones and All. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 74. Devoured, Bones and All. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Mrs. Yu opened her eyes and glared at Yan Qingxi's stomach. Yan Qingxi despised the way Mrs. Yu looked down on her, which was why she made up the baby story. She thought that doing so would provoke Mrs. Yu. The opposite occurred, for the old lady saw through the ruse instantly. Yan Qingxi said, "Just move over, old lady. I'll continue to stay put if you don't move." Mrs. Yu stared at her with a convoluted expression. You. Yan Qingxi shook her head. Yu Tingfeng's mother was vastly different from what Yan Qingxi had originally imagined her to be. Yan Qingxi opened the door and walked out. Mrs. Yu tiptoed and watched as Yan Qingxi walked away. As all traces of her disappeared, Mrs. Yu's face tensed up. What if she really does have his child? Coming out of Yu Tingfeng's home, Yan Qingxi looked at the time and saw that it was already 1 in the afternoon. She was surprised that she slept for so long. The sun was shining bright in the sky. Yan Qingxi had to squint for a while to relieve her eyes of the piercing soreness. Her phone rang. It was Miss Mai. Yan Qingxi picked up the call and said, "I'll go home immediately." Not long after Yan Qingxi left, Yu Tingfeng woke up. He opened his eyes to see an empty space beside him on the bed. He took his time to sit back up. Did she really just run off? Before Yu Tingfeng's anger began to rise, he heard some noise from outside. His lips curled up in a smile. "TCH, and I thought she's left. Looks like she's still here." Thus, he opened his bedroom door arrogantly and saw a lady busy with some stuff in the living room. Yu Tingfeng's face soured. "Ma, why are you here?" He scanned the surroundings immediately but saw no sign of Yan Qingxi's slutty figure. Mrs. Yu huffed. "Humph. If I didn't come, you'd be devoured by that minx, bone and all." A frown from Yu Tingfeng. So, those two bumped into each other. From the looks of it, Yan Qingxi was definitely the one who was unaffected by that encounter. Yu Tingfeng asked, "And where's that minx?" Mrs. Yu lifted her chin. "Well, of course I told her to scram." He snickered. By now he knew Yan Qingxi's abilities all too well. Yan Qingxi would make short work of his own mother's fighting spirit. Mrs. Yu leaned over to her son. "My dear boy, it's not that I don't let you play with women. If you don't like Rook, then I won't force the two of you, but the least you can do is find someone from a more decent household, okay?" Yu Tingfeng walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Taking out a can of beer, he said, "Women from decent households don't excite me. I like the bad ones." You. Mrs. Yu's anger caused her breathing to turn heavy. She recalled Yan Qingxi's words and told him, "You can play, but in a worst-case scenario. In a worst-case scenario, what if you make a baby? I want grandchildren, but anyone can make a baby. I'm picky when it comes to who makes that baby." A sip of beer and Yu Tingfeng asked, "What baby?" Mrs. Yu said, "That slut told me that if she's unhappy, she'll give me a grandchild to play with 10 months later." Puhu. Instead of drinking it in, Yu Tingfeng spat out his entire mouthful of beer. Seeing his reaction, Mrs. Yu bought Yan Qingxi's story. "Son, you have to remember that safety comes first. Of course, if there's really a baby, we can't ever let a child of the Yu family be left on the streets." Mrs. Yu's emotions began spiraling into confusion. She hated that minxy woman, but she could not hate her grandchild. How, then? Yu Tingfeng's slender fingers wiped away the beer froth from his lower lip. A sinister grin formed on his face and his thoughts were indecipherable. Hee. Good. If a grandchild pops out, I'll definitely bring it back for you. Underscore 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 savage seer. I'm not a little vixen, I'm a monstrous she-devil. Chapter 75. I will skin her foxy hide. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 75. I will skin her foxy hide. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. That night, Yan Qingxi was not the only one who had an eventful evening. The Yan family had a hectic time as well. At the Yan family home, the lights were switched on throughout the night, up until the sun rose from the horizon. Yan Mingzhu bawled her eyes out from midnight till sunrise, giving the rest of the family a sleepless night. She cried and cried in utter distress. Her belongings inside her room were all smashed on the ground, and her cell phone screen was already cracked. She sat on the floor and mumbled chokingly, "He really said that he wanted to break up with me. To break up. Just because of a slut. I heard that bitch's voice. She wanted to take a bath with my Jinchuan. Shameless. Shameless. She's exactly like Yan Qingxi. They're all whores." All of a sudden, Yan Mingzhu stood up. "Horny little slut. I must skin her foxy hide that I wanna tear her face apart." Luo Jinchuan was Yan Mingzhu's one and only thought. She crumbled to pieces because of everything that had happened that night. Yi Lingji had to restrain her. "It's already so late. Do you know where they are? If you want to go there and find them, you'll have to wait till tomorrow." Yan Mingzhu threw herself into her mother's embrace and howled, "Mom, how could he do this to me? Tell me, how could he do this thing to me? Is it because I'm not pretty enough? Or my family's not good enough? Or is it because I don't love him enough? What did I do wrong?" Looking on coldly was Yen Rook, who felt rather pleased with herself. Ever since finding out that Yu Tingfeng kept other women, her heart felt a pain that resembled a pot of boiling oil. She looked for Jiang Lai countless times, even going so far as to inquire Yu Tingfeng's secretary, Miss Sun. Yen Rook just wanted to know whether there were any women who interacted with him recently, but none of them ever told her anything. Not wanting the rest of the family to know that Yu Tingfeng had discarded her, Yen Rook felt her days dragging on slowly. Watching Yan Mingzhu's breakdown made her ice-cold heart feel joy, leaving her in a much better mood after seeing Yan Mingzhu's condition. If she could not enjoy her days, then it was best that Yan Mingzhu suffered as well. Yi Lingji adored her daughter dearly. She cursed Luo Jinchuan, "Men are all useless." Once she finished her words, she gave Yan Songnan an intense stare. His expression remained unfeeling. "Don't make so much noise in the middle of the night. Mingzhu, you have to change your bad-tempered ways." He may be her father, but Yan Songnan felt that it was all too normal for Luo Jinchuan to look for other women. Knowing his own daughter, most men could not take her diva-like temperament. Men prefer the softness of a woman, and being a man himself, he understood that clearly. Frankly speaking, it would have been truly abnormal if a rich kid like Luo Jinchuan did not seek out other girls. "Dad, are you still my father? You're criticizing me when Luo Jinchuan is the one who has other women. What did I do wrong? What mistakes have I made?" Yan Mingzhu shrieked like a madwoman, for in her mind, she was always right. Yi Lingji consoled hastily, "It's not your fault, it's not your fault. It's all that useless man's fault. Your relationship with him has been going steady for a few years now. That other woman must have seduced him. Yes, it has to be it must be that slut who seduced him. I'll rip her." Yen Rook's face was filled with mockery. "Steady relationship. Humph. If it was steady, you'd have gotten married already. 3 years wouldn't have gone by without any word of marriage or even an engagement." The noise made Yen Songnan's head throb. "Please don't make so much noise. I'll ask Jinchuan tomorrow. He's a man, you have to give him some dignity." What he originally wanted to add on was, "Be gentler, don't just scream and shout like nobody's business," but when Yan Mingzhu wailed once more, he closed his mouth and kept quiet. Chapter 76. Don't even think about touching what belongs to me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 76. Don't even think about touching what belongs to me. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. With a son who encountered a car accident, a daughter who cried to no end, and a company that had been facing difficulties for 2 days straight, Yen Songnan had never felt so tired in his entire life. He shook his head irritably, grabbed his clothes, then went out of the house and drove off. Yen Songnan drove to a rather ordinary-looking residential area. 2 rings of the doorbell and the door swung open. He went in and hugged a young lady. Your place is the only place I can feel at peace. The young lady replied softly, take a seat. I'll pour you a glass of water. Yen Songnan sat on the sofa. The young lady turned around and went to pour him some water. She took a bit of white powder from a little jar and placed it into the water, melting immediately upon contact. It was completely undetectable. She carried the glass out and put on a warm, gentle smile. By the time Yen Qingxi reached home, Miss Mai was already there. Yen Qingxi showed her the photo that was taken the night before. What do you think? Can you make out that it's me? Miss Mai was stunned. This is you. The woman in the photo sported a bob and wore a peaked cap, a stark contrast to Yen Qingxi's usual attire. Only the body figure looked similar, but Miss Mai dared not jump to conclusions. That means you can't see that it's me. Say, what do you think will happen if I gave this photo to Yen Mingzhu? Miss Mai had knowledge of some of the things regarding Yen Qingxi's family, so she asked, you're not afraid that they'll come looking for you? Yen Qingxi flung her long hair back. Looking for me? Of course not. If they're looking for someone, they'll have to look for Shui Zheng. What does it have to do with me? When Yen Qingxi met with Luo Jinchuan the night prior, she made a point to dress up like Shui Zheng, be it in the way she did her hair or her dress. Sympathizing for Shui Zheng somewhat, Miss Mai asked, is Shui Zheng just collateral damage? Of course not, Yen Qingxi said. No one told her to come and steal my role. I'm just taking back what's rightfully mine, that's all. In other words, it's not unjust because she did actually sleep with Luo Jinchuan. Yen Qingxi said it before, don't even think about touching what belongs to me. Even if it was taken away, she would still take it back. What was hers would always be hers. The rest should scrap their intention to dip their fingers in it. Miss Mai questioned, if you release this photo, you'll get the role. Luo Jinchuan will help you. Yen Qingxi's finger scrolled down the phone screen. She looked at each picture and beamed with a smile. Whether he's willing to help me or not isn't important now. What's important is that Shui Zheng won't have the role anymore. And why is that? You have no idea how much of a temper my sweet big sister has. If she thinks the woman in the photo is Shui Zheng, she'll come knocking on Shui Zheng's door. Luo Jinchuan might underestimate the Yen family, but the Yen family still has some connections in Luo City. They can still kill off the career of a small-time actress. In an instant, Miss Mai understood everything. Yen Qingxi was getting someone to do all the dirty work, killing not 2 but 3 birds with 1 stone. She would not only get her revenge on Yen Mingzhu, but she would also be able to reclaim her role, in addition to dealing with a severe blow to Luo Jinchuan. F***ck, you. It's all so simple for you. Yen Qingxi inserted into her phone the SIM card that Lil Su had bought for her from some roadside shop. She chose 10 photographs and sent them to Yen Mingzhu's number. A notification from the phone and the photographs were successfully sent. She took out the SIM card from the phone and broke it in half before discarding it in a nearby dustbin. Flashing a cold smile, she said, let's wait and see. Director phone will call you in less than 2 days. Savage seer, am a beautiful and talented she-devil. I establish myself at every step and my IQ is infinite. Chapter 77. It never ends well for those who offend him. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 77. It never ends well for those who offend him. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Miss Mai felt a chill up her spine. Can you guarantee that Director Foam will look for me once Shui Zheng is out of the picture? Yen Qingxi raised her chin arrogantly and confidently. Yes, that I guarantee. In Director Feng's heart, he likes it the most if I am his consort Zhao. Beautiful and charming despite the lack of slovenliness, Yen Qingxi was bursting with confidence, making her radiate like a sparkling diamond. Miss Mai remarked in earnest, you'll get angry. Very angry. Yan Qingxi curled the corner of her lips. Oh, that's a must. Heaven won't permit it if Yan Qingxi isn't angry. Tisk, cocky, aren't you? You didn't respond to young Master Yu the other night. Has there been any news in the past 2 days? Recalling the previous night, she smiled. None. Whatever happened the night before was between her, Yu Tingfeng, the sky, and the earth. However, Yu Tingfeng did not do anything after that, which made Yan Qingxi feel rather suspicious. Miss Mai asked, what do you plan on doing? Yu Tingfeng isn't someone to be provoked. It never ends well for those who offend him. Yan Qingxi worked up her spirit and said, I'm not one to be provoked as well. You. Please. Barely an hour after Yan Mingzhu received the photos, she knew instantly who that horny slut was. Yan Qingxi told Miss Mai to get someone who could purposely leak out the news involving Luo Jinchuan and Shui Zheng. Once Yan Mingzhu got that news, she smashed an antique vase at home before bringing Yi Lingji to deal with Shui Zheng. She called Luo Jinchuan but was unable to get through. She tried to find him, but he could not be located. Luo Jinchuan's attitude was unequivocally telling her that they were done. Therefore, all of Yan Mingzhu's hatred was directed onto Shui Zheng. Yan Mingzhu was deeply in love with Luo Jinchuan. Although her man might get cozy with a small-time actress, Yan Mingzhu would always cook up excuses for him, saying that it had to be Shui Zheng who seduced Luo Jinchuan. Otherwise, why would he do something so unworthy of her when she loved him with all her heart? Yan Qingxi had no idea what Yan Mingzhu did, but Miss Mai kept tabs on the situation. She told Yan Qingxi as soon as she got the news. Shui Zheng had been hospitalized. Indeed, it was Yan Mingzhu who clobbered Shui Zheng. Yan Qingxi sneered. She had no pity for Shui Zheng at all. They had never spoken a word to each other, and in truth, it did seem pretty evil to hold a grudge against Shui Zheng. The only thing to blame was that Shui Zheng stole Yan Qingxi's role. That was exactly how the entertainment circle worked. If one was not evil enough, then others would snatch away one's opportunities time and again. After a gap of only 1 day from Shui Zheng's hospitalization, Miss Mai received Director Feng's call. She picked up the call in the calmest manner possible, without any hint of being too demanding or subservient, and with an absence of any anxiety or delight. All right. I'll tell Qingxi and ask for her opinion. I'll get back to you soonest. Goodbye, Director Feng. Having hung up the phone, Miss Mai rejoiced and threw her 100.50 kilogram body over Yan Qingxi. Director Feng called. Consort Zhao's role is yours. It's still yours. Qingxi, you're really. Suffocated by Miss Mai, Yan Qingxi wheezed. You're crushing me to death. Miss Mai was so emotional that her face turned red. In another 20 minutes, I'll call him back and tell him that you agreed. Qingxi, I'm just so happy right now. She did not want to answer too quickly because that would lower their value significantly. It was best to remain slightly unenthusiastic, so Director Feng's side would feel that they were not indispensable in Yan Qingxi and Miss Mai's eyes. Confidence may be lacking, but pride must always be upheld. Chapter 78. I don't fancy that man. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 78. I don't fancy that man. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After the excitement, Miss Mai said, then again, Shui Zheng was pretty beat up. I heard she had a concussion in her brain and her face was so badly scratched that she's nearly disfigured. To Yan Qingxi, that was not a worthy consideration. She's lucky Yan Mingzhu didn't kill her for sleeping with Luo Jinchuan. You have no idea how important Luo Jinchuan is to her. Then why did you? Yan Qingxi shrugged her shoulders. Yes, I did seduce Luo Jinchuan, but don't worry about him. I don't fancy him at all. Anything to do with Yan Mingzhu is utter rubbish. Yan Qingxi did not take a liking to Luo Jinchuan, but he was the love of Yan Mingzhu's life. Luo Jinchuan was the fastest and most convenient way to get revenge on the Yen family. In short, it could be summed up in one sentence: this B*TCH is seducing your man, what are you gonna do about it? Aren't you afraid that Luo Jinchuan would tell the Yen family that you're back? Miss Mai asked. Why should I be afraid? If Luo Jinchuan decides he doesn't want any dignity, he can say that and tell the Yen family that he likes his girlfriend's sister. You're really. Miss Mai felt that if one were to offend anyone at all, it best not be Yen Qingxi. Doing so would result in a horrible demise. If you don't like Luo Jinchuan, then what about Yu Tingfeng? Him. Yen Qingxi paused for a moment. He isn't any better than Luo Jinchuan. Yen Qingxi accepted the role in Director Feng's beauty's rival in Palace. Miss Mai would sign the contract on the next day. Jin Xuechu's MV was facing some difficulties, so the shooting had to be halted temporarily. Yen Qingxi got her luggage in order and had to rush to Jing City's filming location, where she would join the rest of the cast and prepare for the shoot. On the day she was due to leave, Jin Xuechu came to the residential area and bumped into Yen Qingxi. She told him, I'm rushing to a shoot in Jing City. Let me know whenever your MV is going to continue filming. I'll come back immediately. Jin Xuechu's face was somewhat lethargic. He nodded and smiled. All right then, when the time comes, you'd better not decline and tell me that your price has gone up. She smiled. I'd be willing to shoot for free if it's an MV with God Shui. Miss Mai gestured secretly to Yen Qingxi, reminding her that they were in a rush to catch their flight. Noticing that, Jin Xuechu told Yen Qingxi, take care. May the filming go smoothly for you. A nod from Yen Qingxi. Thanks. Jin Zuchu watched as Yen Qingxi and her manager, Miss Mai, entered the elevator. He then massaged his temples. His phone rang, and when he saw that the caller was his agent, he picked it up immediately. The agent was incredibly anxious. God Shui, why did you offend the Yu clan? The Yu clan is behind this effort to topple me. Jin Xuechu frowned. Aren't they? The Yu clan company's general manager, Chu Jing, personally came to Golden Universe to discuss their intention to acquire the company. Got it. I'll go there now. Chu Jing went straight into Yu Tingfeng's office after returning from Golden Universe. He sat down immediately and said, Big bro, why do you insist on acquiring Golden Universe and Universal Entertainment? I went to see their CEO today to discuss the acquisition, and do you know what price they're asking for? They're asking for 30% higher than their market value. Evidently, Chu Jing's discussion was unfruitful. Yu Tingfeng's gaze left the computer screen and aimed directly at Chu Jing. Do I lack money? Startled, Chu Jing shook his head. Of course not, but that extra 30% is still a significant amount of money. Even if we have tons of money, we can't just spend it like that. Yu Tingfeng leaned back. Then why not just tell him directly? If he doesn't accept our price, then we'll just take it by force. _____ God Shui, I'm caught in the crossfire. This an injustice to me. CEO Yu, as a rich man, I have to show my power and wealth from time to time. Chapter 79. Failing to get Yen Qingxi would result in regret. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 79. Failing to get Yen Qingxi would result in regret. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. A stupefied Chu Jing chuckled softly. Big bro, we're cultured people. We can't just take it by force. It's been a long time since we've done that kind of thing, am I right? Did I order you to do that? Chu Jing chuckled once more. I understand, I'll ignore that. Don't worry, we'll get our hands on the company. Yu Tingfeng waved his hand and sent Chu Jing away. The latter stood up, pursing his lips. He stood at the door but did not leave. Instead, he asked, Big bro, I heard that some woman made you unhappy. Let me know who it is. I'll help you take care of it. Iciness flashed past Yutingfeng's eyes. Do you think your turn will come? If he wanted to dispose of her, it would be none other than himself who would undertake the task. I talk too much. Chu Jing dashed off immediately. As soon as he left the room, he saw Jiang Lai holding a set of documents, waiting to go in. Chu Jing gave Jiang Lai a reminder. He's not in a good mood. Jiang Lai rolled his eyes. Have you ever seen him in a good mood these past few days? Thinking for a moment, Chu Jing replied, "Tisk that I haven't." Jiang Lai took a deep breath before knocking and entering. CEO. He greeted the CEO and placed the documents on the table. Yu Tingfeng opened them and perused them leisurely. What has she been up to these few days? After that night, Yan Qingxi made no contact with Yu Tingfeng. Jiang Lai knew who it was he asked about. The former was unsure if Yan Qingxi had already departed for Jing City, so the response was, she hasn't been doing anything. She's constantly in her apartment. Yu Tingfeng smiled icily. She's a calm one. Tell Kai Lanyuan the investment will be delayed. Let's see how long she can stay calm if she doesn't have anything to film. He thought that they had become partners in crime after murdering someone that fateful night. She should be the one to contact him first, but as it turned out, she was much more headstrong than expected. Jiang Lai hesitated before saying, CEO you don't seem like you're spending too much time on Miss Qingxi, aren't you? Yu Tingfeng picked up a pen and signed his name on the corner of each page. So talkative. Seems like both of you have a lot of free time during work. His signature looked hegemonic, just like his personality. That time, however, Jiang Lai trembled in fear as he watched the pen move. Yu Tingfeng's murderous intent was obvious, and each stroke of the pen resembled the slashing of a knife. Jiang Lai apologized immediately. I'm sorry. I spoke too much. Yu Tingfeng threw the pen aside, well aware of the fact that he spent too much of his time on Yan Qingxi. It was a feeling that others could not understand, and in fact, even he himself could not comprehend it. Meeting that woman and failing to get her would cause unrest within his heart, which in turn would taint his entire life with the feeling of regret. Yan Qingxi, Yan Qingxi. That name and that woman was fast becoming a nightmare for him. The only way to rid himself of that nightmare was to have her within his grasp. Yu Tingfeng said, give her the cold shoulder. She'll come begging if she's desperate. Prepare everything and tell Miss Sun we're going on a business trip tomorrow. Understood. 1 week later, Yu Tingfeng came back from the business trip. He went home for a good night's rest, then went back to work the following day. Shuddering in trepidation, Jiang Lai stood in front of Yu Tingfeng, afraid to move. Yu Tingfeng stood in front of the window wall, with the sun's bright rays shining in and radiating on his body. His breathtaking face was frighteningly cold. He narrowed his eyes, and with lips so cold that they could freeze the entire city, he responded slowly, are you going to tell me that she hasn't done anything in the past week? Jiang Lai replied hastily, 1 week ago, Miss Yen went for a movie shoot. She's now at Jing City. Chapter 80. He was determined to have Yan Qingxi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 80. He was determined to have Yan Qingxi. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yu Tingfeng turned around. He narrowed his phoenix-like eyes. She's shooting a movie. Jiang Lai stuttered, it's the TV series that someone took from her. Miss Qingxi got the role back. He already knew with certainty what the specific reason was. It seemed to be a case where two parties who fought with each other both lost out in the end. However, he had a feeling that things were not that simple. He had already sent people to investigate, and the details of what happened could be obtained fairly quickly. Yu Tingfeng's face was calm and composed, but his emotions were undeniably explosive. Peace was not a luxury he possessed if Yan Qingxi continued to elude his grasp. A smile crept up his face. She's good. I underestimated her. He thought that it was possible to exert control over Yan Qingxi, thinking that she only wanted fame and would come to him because of her lack of resources. He did not expect her to come up with her own means. It was no surprise. She was a murderous evildoer who was capable of committing various sinful acts. There was nothing that she could not do. 3 years ago, Yan Qingxi was arrested. He waited for her to come to him, to beg him, but that woman managed to get out all by herself. 3 years later, he thought he would no longer be attracted to that woman, but in the end, she became more bewitching than ever before. History was repeating itself. Both times he waited for her to beg him, but it ended up with her having no use for him at all. Yu Tingfeng's heart was itching with an indescribable feeling of agitation. His buttons were always pushed, but he could never bring himself to truly get angry. Whenever he saw her in front of him, she looked so weak that a single blow could send her tumbling down. One finger was all it took to crush her, but why was it that he could not get a hold of her? Yu Tingfeng felt like a hunter on the hunting ground. Yan Qingxi was his prey, one that he had to capture at all costs. Spite flashed through his enigmatic pupils. That role, how did she get it? Jiang Lai explained earnestly, well, it's like this. Yan Mingzhu found out that Shuizheng slept with Luo Jinchuan. She went and beat Shuizheng up so badly that Shuizheng had to be hospitalized. Under the Yan family's pressure, Shuizheng was stripped of the role, so the director once again considered Miss Qingxi. Having finished listening to the story, Yu Tingfeng sneered and disdain filled his face. Do you really believe she didn't have a hand in this? To tell you the truth, no, I don't believe that. Yu Tingfeng placed his hand to his necktie and loosened it. Keep a close eye on every one of her movements, and book me a ticket to Jing City for tomorrow. Stunned, Jiang Lai wondered if he really was going to chase her all the way to Jing City. He shut up and shelved his intention to offer some advice when he saw the will and determination in his boss's eyes. Yes. That night, Yu Tingfeng's mood was the worst it had ever been, but his childhood friend from overseas, Helan Fangnian, gave him a surprise call to tell him that he had returned to the country. Didn't you say you took up permanent residence in country M? I came back to look for someone. If I find that person, I'll head back. Disappointment and regret were rife in Helan Fangnian's voice. Who is it? I'll tell you when I locate the person. All right. I won't press on. Since you're back, let me welcome you at the Jade Orchid Pavilion. It may be late at night, but they were still hanging out at the Jade Orchid Pavilion. It was the same old place, surrounded by all those rich kids from Luo City. Yu Tingfeng's face, however, remained as sour as before. Eventually, Helan Fangnian could not take it anymore. I don't come back often, you know. Can't you smile a bit for me? Yu Tingfeng had been pulling a long face ever since he sat down. His body continued to give off a cold vibe, and earlier on, he even sent away those pretty girls that were massaging his legs and feet. Chu Jing shook his head. Our CEO has been like this for a few days now. The pressure is killing me. ____ a new character appears. Don't complain to me and say that the name is feminine, I did it on purpose.